Andy has been clear that his first priority when coming into government is to give people some breathing space with the cost of living. And he wasn't going to waste time, spending months debating these issues.
Another 6 a.m. news release from the government this morning. Andy Burnham has put his name to a £2 cap on single bus fares outside London in England. The government says it will cost £400 million. We can speak now to the Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander, who kept her brief in the recent reshuffle. Good morning.
Good morning, Kate. Thanks
and
for having me on.
congratulations. Well, thank you for joining us. You have kept your job, of course. You've announced £2 bus fares in England this morning. Had you been arguing for this under Keir Starmer?
So under the previous leadership, we obviously had a £3 bus fare cap in place because when we came into government, we inherited a situation where there was no money set aside to continue the bus fare cap. And so we looked at all of the different pressures that we were facing and we had that £3 cap in place. But knowing how much people are struggling with the cost of living still, Andy coming in as our new Prime Minister and being very clear that he wants to give some breathing space to people, we felt that it's the right thing to do to say today that as from January of next year, for the whole of next year, there will be a £2 cap on single bus fares across England. Obviously, it builds on some of the brilliant work that Andy did when he was Mayor of Greater Manchester, where he capped fares and also brought the buses back under public control, actually setting up a franchised bus network there so that he had control over the routes that the buses were running on, the timetables and the fares. And we know that there are millions of people across the country who depend upon buses every day, going about those everyday journeys, whether it's to the shops, to getting to work, being able to get to the GP, for example. These are lifeline services for people. And we think it's right to help with the cost of living given the pressures that people are still facing.
I'm interested that you say that the previous Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, couldn't find the money, that the money wasn't available to take this to £2 instead of the £3 cap, which is where she landed. How will this be funded? Where's the money coming from now?
So this is switch spending. Andy was clear at the Cabinet meeting yesterday, our first Cabinet meeting, that he was asking colleagues to look at what they could reprioritise in their own departmental budgets. What we have done here is take some of the money that had been allocated to grants for international climate projects. We're going to make those into loans as well instead, which brings us into line with the way that a lot of international climate finance works. And so as a result of making it loans as opposed to grants for these international climate finance projects, that does free up some money. There's also a little bit of underspend in the DESNZ budget, which we're going to be using. We'd also allocated some money within DFT for the continuation of the £3 bus fare cap into next year. So it's a combination of all of those three things, which means that we're now able to do this. And it's about refocusing, I think, on domestic priorities, the things that people are worried about in their day-to-day lives. We know that there are a lot of people that get to the end of the month and they're thinking, have I got any money left in my bank account? And so I think along with the change that was announced yesterday...
Yes, Heidi Alexander, can I just stop you there? Because I just want to be really clear about the money. We can come back to talk about the political ethos, but I just want to be really clear with our listeners about what you're saying there. Are you saying that the government will lend money to overseas nations? And one of the things that you identify in the press release is the Tropical Forests Forever facility. Are you saying we would loan money to international projects and expect them to pay it back?
Correct, yes. And that's the way that a number of different international climate finance schemes work. And so there's £400 million that had been allocated in the budget of DESNZ. That was going to be grants, but it is now going to be loans, and so that money would be paid back. And
why is the money coming from you call it DESNZ, but it's energy security and net zero? Why is it coming from that department? Is this a bit of a sign that their spending in that area, in net zero, is less important under this government than under the previous one?
So we work closely with the Treasury on this and with Andy's team in Number 10. And those decisions were taken centrally about how best to use money that's available across government. Now, we saw some of this, didn't we, under the previous administration, under Keir's leadership, when we were looking at funding the Defence Investment Plan. Number 10, asked me, for example, to make some changes to the roads budget, which will be out for consultation in the coming months. And so this is about the team pulling together across government and addressing the issues that really matter in people's everyday lives.
But quite a lot of this comes from that Department for Energy Security and Net Zero budget. So should we take that as a sign that for Andy Burnham, he thinks it's more important to spend money on people's cost of living issues and helping them, reduce some of their living costs in their day-to-day lives than it is to spend money, for example, on overseas forest projects?
So Andy has been clear that his first priority when coming into government is to give people some breathing space with the cost of living. And he wasn't going to waste time, spending months debating these issues. We were going to get on in the first couple of days and make these announcements. That's why yesterday you saw the announcement being made about VAT coming off.
I understand that, but I'm asking you a really
specific.
I'm asking you a specific question. It's only because our listeners are asking this question that I'm putting it to you. It's about the priority, and you might think, and maybe many of our listeners do, actually it's much more important to cap bus fares than it is to spend on an international forestry project. I'm just asking if there's been a bit of a rethink there in the way we spend money.
I don't think you can underestimate how important buses are to millions of people across the country, Kate. For the 1 in 5 households that don't have access to a car, for older people who perhaps aren't driving anymore.
Okay.
Buses really are the backbone of our local economies. And, Andy has been a great champion of a better public transport network up in Greater Manchester. He's received praise, and rightly so, for the work that he did there with creating the B network, creating a reliable, affordable, comprehensive, high-quality public transport network. And he has been clear that that is what he wants to create in other parts of the country. And this £2 bus fare cap is just the start of it.
What is the total cost?
So the total cost is slightly over £500 million. The £400 million, £454 million comes from the combination of underspends in the Energy Department, but also the switching of that money, which was going to be paid in grants on international climate projects, now will be loans. So that's how that money comes together.
Elsewhere, there's another story on the front pages today. You were previously Minister for Courts and Legal Services. Your colleagues Wes Streeting and Shabana Mahmood have apologised for joking about the early release scheme. They've said there was no ill intent, but there is a story on the front pages elsewhere today, the story of PC Harper. He was the police officer dragged under a car for a mile in 2019. The law was changed because of his case, in fact. 2 of his killers, they were passengers in the car. They're set to be released early. I mean, your colleagues are laughing about early release. This case shows it's really not funny. Is it acceptable for them to be released early, in your view?
So this type of situation is not funny, and I think that Wes and Shabana have apologised for that. And, I also think that those remarks don't reflect the seriousness with which I know Shabana Mahmood treated the whole criminal justice system when she was Justice Secretary herself. You raised the case of PC Harper. Now, that was obviously a horrific crime, and my deepest sympathies are still with PC Harper's friends and family. It is important, Kate, to say that the killer who was behind the wheel on the evening of that horrific crime was given one of the most serious sentences that the court can hand out. He must face a parole board before he has any chance of seeing the light of day, and he has been barred from the sentencing changes. I do think it is worth remembering, if we cast our minds back to that summer of 2024 when I was working with Shabana in the Ministry of Justice. At one point in time there were about 100 prison spaces left, and the criminal justice system was on the verge of collapse.
And everybody understands that. And I think actually that's the context here, and it's really important context. But these 2 men, they were jailed for 13 years in 2020. PC Harper's mother has been told that they will now be let out early. If Sarah Jones, who is now the policing minister, met with his widow, Lissy, at the time, backed the campaign for tougher sentences. How can this Labour government, which supported that, now oversee the early release of these two men? I mean, is it time to look again, maybe, in this specific case, and there are certainly others?
So we have got some exemptions in place when you look at some of the changes that are coming in through the Sentencing Act. And, we also, I do want your listeners to be clear about this, that the individual who drove that car on that night a number of years ago, he is barred from these sentencing changes and will have to go before a parole board. Yes, but these two men who were passengers in the car, they were in the car for a mile as PC Harper was dragged behind it at 40 miles an hour by a rope. They were trying to swing him off that car. Kate, that was subject to a court case. I understand how horrific that whole incident was. So should it be reviewed? Those two individuals were given a shorter sentence than the individual who was behind the wheel and was driving the car, and it is right that individual who was driving the car is barred from these sentencing changes and will have to go in front of a parole board before his potential release in the future. I'll just ask one more time, just really directly, yes or no. Should the early release of these two men in this particular case be reviewed, in your view, yes or no? I'm not going to get into the detail, Kate, of individual cases. I'm the Transport Minister, not the Justice Minister. I understand why you raised the question, and I understand why people will feel horrified by the incidents of that case. As I say, the person who was behind the wheel is barred from these sentencing changes around early release and will have to go in front of a parole board before he was released. And he was the one who was responsible for driving the car on that horrific night. Okay. Heidi Alexander, Transport Secretary, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Thank you. Thanks for your time.